First is the time, right? People are not doing stuff with the time that they have, or they're doing low leverage activities with the time they have. And so I think one of the things that the formal education system did really well, that people poo-poo on it, is the idea of going into debt to gain education is something that fundamentally makes sense.
Alex Hormozi is an American entrepreneur. He started as a management consultant in the public sector, then left that career to pursue a career in fitness, starting his first gym at age 23. He scaled his small gym chain from 0 to 6 locations in 3 years.
What is necessary for people to break the broke mindset that society has kind of trapped people in that keeps them poor?
So I think like people have two sets of resources, right, that they allocate. So they've got time and they've got money.
Yeah.
And so if you look at someone's bank statement and you look at their calendar, you know what their life is. And you can also predict where their life is going to be in X amount of years, right? And so if someone wants to change what their life is going to look like, you have to reallocate where you're investing the resources that you have. And so from a time perspective, people who are poor, in my opinion, spend a lot of time not doing stuff. And that sounds terrible to say, but like at the base level, they're distracted, they're
not doing the right
procrastinating.
stuff.
Right. Well, I would even say not doing anything.
Just distracting them,
Right.
Playing
Just
video games,
Netflix, etc. You know,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that stuff, right? So there's like the base is like they don't do anything. They're purely distracting themselves from their current state, which is hard because it's hard to confront reality. If you're like not happy, it's easier to just distract yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now the level above that is you've got people who are operating, they are working every day, but they're operating in low leverage opportunities, right? So they're doing things that do not give them a lot of return on their time, right? And so it's like I could work, it doesn't matter how many hours I work at McDonald's, like it's very, very difficult to become wealthy there, right? It's just near impossible, right? Versus like you could buy a building for $10 million and then sell it to somebody else for $11 million, just get the contract and make $1 million on the exchange. Super high leverage, right? From a time perspective, which is crazy for somebody who doesn't have money to even contemplate something like that. But the only way that happened, and that required no money, is skill, right? And so like that's an example of like it didn't require money to make that money. That's skill that's required to do that. And so first is the time, right? People are not doing stuff with the time that they have, or they're doing low leverage activities with the time they have. And then they're not trying to increase their output per unit time, which means investing in their skill set. So like one of the easiest ways to gain leverage on your time, and when I say leverage, just for everybody, like leverage is the difference between inputs and outputs in a system. So, Archimedes said, if you give me a lever long enough, I can move the world. And so to the same degree, if you have enough skills, you can do anything, right? And so skills give you leverage on your time. So you get more out of each unit of time. So if I'm a master cold caller, I will get more sales and calls booked for the same unit of time than somebody who sucks at it. Same time, more output. So I think one of the things that the formal education system did really well, that people poo-poo on it, is the idea of going into debt to gain education is something that fundamentally makes sense.
Yes, but it's got to be the right education that can make you money.
You got to get a return on it.
Yes.
That's the issue, right? You have to get a return on it, because like the idea of borrowing from a future self that can make more money to pay for the thing that you're getting the skill for makes total sense. I think Elon was saying something about how Neuralink in the future, it's going to be such a competitive advantage that they could price it at whatever they want, because once you have it, you'll be so much more able than anyone who doesn't have it, that you could so easily pay off the price of the thing. That's how it should work conceptually, right?
Crazy.
That's how education is supposed to work.
Yes.
And so this is the simplest example that I have. So a friend of mine has a 17-year-old daughter. She got a job at a bowling alley and she makes minimum wage. And he said, why don't you become a phlebotomist? And she was like, well, I don't want to spend the money. He's like, it's $500 and it's a 2-day certification. And then after you have that, you make $25 an hour. So she didn't have the money. Now she could save it to get the $500, right? Or she could take a loan for the $500 from her dad and pay it back in a week, right? Because she has higher earning capacity. And so it was like she could either save for 8 weeks, right, from her bowling alley to pay the $500, or she could take a loan for the $500, do the 2 days, and then pay it off in a week. So at that 1 week, she now has 7 more weeks of earning capacity. This is a micro example, right? 7 more weeks of earning capacity at her new level, and she'd be net positive on the next 7 weeks of earnings, right? And so that's just a micro example of like what skill investing does. Totally. The single highest return on investment thing I've ever done, and not to sound trite here, but I just like using scenarios. Like if I had taken all the money that I'd spent on coaching, mentorships, courses, workshops, seminars, and put that in the S&P 500 when I, 10 years ago, right? The amount that I would have right now is inconsequential compared to what I currently have. And it's because I invested in something different. So rather than investing in the S&P 500, I invested in the S&P 500. So I took all of the excess cash that I had every single month, and rather than saying like, oh, I'm at a dollar cost average, I'm long term, I wait 40 years, whatever. I was like, I just don't make enough money. So like I could be the millionaire next door who saves every penny, doesn't go to Starbucks for my entire life, and have $2 million when I'm old, or whatever.
For the last 10 years of my life.
Right, and literally enjoy nothing during that period of time. That doesn't sound like this. It's not a trade I wanted to make. And so I had a belief that I know I will work hard, and if I'm given the right tools, I will be able to implement them. And so I took all my extra money, and this is kind of, a lot of people might not necessarily agree with me on this, but it worked for me. So I put all of every dollar I had, even went into debt, to get access to communities and mentors and coaching programs and masterminds.
Yes.
And those were the biggest gifts of all. And it wasn't even just the biggest gifts I got from those wasn't even the education, but it was the perspectives on reality. It was people disproving things that I thought to be true. So I was like, this is the way the world is. And they were like, that's false. And my whole paradigm shifted because I had distortions of reality. I thought reality was different than it was. And so right now for people who are poor, it's because they actually don't see reality for what it is. Because the way they see reality, they see making money to be impossible or incredibly difficult, or it's only for a certain select people, not for them, right? And it's just because they literally cannot see it. And so I'm trying to think of an example of when like you can see something that, an easier example is like kids and parents, right? Like a kid thinks the world is a certain way and the parent's like, you just haven't seen enough stuff yet. And so, as you level up in the entrepreneur space, there's also just more levels of that where other people are like, this is the perspective you need to have. And you're like, no way, that's possible. And so that's where those rooms gave me the highest ROI. The other skills, because there's so many people there that are trying to learn the same things, they already said, hey, get this program, read this book. And so they helped sift through the mountain of information that's out there because I only have one resource, which is time at that time, right? And so it's like, okay, I'll spend it, but where do I spend it? And they were like, okay, if you want to learn real estate, these are the top 3 guys. You can join this Facebook group, get into this guy's community. He has a coaching program that helps you do wholesaling. This guy's a coach that does Airbnbs. This guy does, and so it's like, which one do I choose? The answer for everybody who's curious is do them all. Because you're just like, you're not, like people are like, which one should I do? I'm like, you're not going to be poorer by learning more.
Right.
Right? And then it's not like you have a finite capacity to learn. The more you learn, the better you get at learning. Right? And then the more lines and synergies you find between different skill sets and opportunities.
The more dangerous you become.
100%.
If you just learn cold calling, but you didn't also learn, copywriting and email marketing or speaking on stage, it's the combination of multiple skills that make your earning power so much greater.
It's the compound.
Yes.
And so I have this example where I break down Jay-Z, right? And so if you look at Jay-Z in the beginning, like he had, he probably had a natural proclivity for rhyming and beat or rhythm, whatever, right? So that was his first like kind of skill. He probably practiced that a little bit because he was into it, right? And then he started rapping, right? So that was his first level skill. And then he learned, writing lyrics. And it's like, okay, so that's another
producing,
skill. Right, and exactly. Then he learned producing, and then he learned marketing, and then he learned
performing on stages or something.
Yes, and then he learned how to sign other people to his, how to start a label, and then he started learning. And so with each of these skills, it wasn't 1 + 1, it was like 1 + 1 + 1 = 10, right? And so like in a formal world, like the world that's not rap, like if someone's good at math, they can learn accounting or bookkeeping first, right? It's like, okay, that's a level 1 skill. And then you learn accounting, okay, now you're making more. And then you learn how insurance works, and you're like, oh, okay, now you can start to see this person evolve. And then you learn how tax and tax efficiencies work, and you're like, oh. And then you learn how to package and sell businesses and negotiate those deals with private equity and things like that. All of a sudden, that's a CFO. That's somebody who's making multiple $1 million a year, but it's the same basic few skills that stack on top of each other and get disproportionate returns on all the prior skills with each new additional skill.
Yes.
And so the idea is not, like people ask the wrong question when they're like, which course should I buy? Which program should I do?
It's
do
yes.
them all.
It's yes.
Do them all.
Yes to all, yeah.
Yeah, you want, like, because each one of them you will learn things. And there's going to be either different ways that someone's teaching, they'll have different communities, they'll have different beliefs, you'll learn from all of them. Like the single greatest skill, in my opinion, is being able to find a place that you can shut out external stimuli and you can focus.
Yes.
Because for me, the single highest ROI habit that I have is that for me, between 5 a.m. and noon, I have nothing on my calendar. It is just work, no meetings, and then all my meetings happen after noon. This is for the entrepreneur. Now, if you're like in a job right now, then it's got to be in the morning before you go to work and in the evening after you come back from work. But like, having that dedicated time, and if you're like, well, I'm not a morning person, fine, then just work late. Like, that's okay. Like, I've got billionaire buddies who are like, oh, I wake up at 10, but they work really late. That's their special time that no one bothers them. It tends to be at the bookends of the day, though, just from my experience, because in the middle of the day, you get pestered, and it's hard to get into that deep focus, that deep learning that you get when you really pour yourself into something. Most skills can be learned decently with about 20 hours of focused effort. 20 hours. Like the first 20 hours of you actually doing something, you learn the most you're going to learn about the thing. If you just consider by percentage of learning from like, you know nothing, to 20 hours in, you already have a really good understanding of the thing. The problem is that most people will take years to start the first hour. And so that habit that you're referencing is that my speed, at least now, as I've gotten better at this stuff, is that like I try and detract the time from when I want to learn something or when I want to start doing something to starting it as soon as I can, because I just want to start getting through those 20 hours as fast as I can.
Yes.
And so that's just been a very tangible, because it seems like this amorphous thing, but there was a study that was done. There's like, in the first 20 hours, you can learn almost any skill. Playing guitar, running an ad, doing like you will learn more in that first 20 hours than any other time. So it's like, then just get to that 20 hours and don't delay.
Yes.
And that's been one of the deepest lessons I've had, because it took me 4 years to learn how to build a website, and it took me 1 day to actually learn.
So when people come from a place, what I'm hearing you say, when they come from a place of that intention of service, or because this needs to be in the world.
It's art. Art exists not to do something, it exists to exist.
Right.
It's like no one says, why did you paint that? It's like,
because it needed to come out. I needed to express it.
Exactly. And so I think that if people chose their businesses that way, I think, and don't get me wrong, I'm all about making money. Like, by all means, go get your bag. You know
Make
what
as
I mean?
much as you can.
Yeah, by all means. But I think that what it does is it ends up freeing you to then make your real impact, because then you can start whatever the next thing, and hopefully your first thing is that thing, but realistically it probably isn't. And all you have to do is look at every entrepreneur that's really wealthy, the amount of graveyard businesses they have in their back. Right. And so like right now, if you're listening and you're like, I'm not sure if this is the perfect business idea, let me just save you the time. It's not, because look at every other person who has been ultra successful. They have 10 failed business ideas. So just start, so you can just start notching off the bad businesses, right? But extending the time horizon, I think, only happens if you do shift the intention through which you're building it, or you're just unbelievably self-disciplined. But I think it's easier to just like start at it with the right heart, because small tangent, but I think it'll be worth it, is that the reason that most people aren't successful, in my opinion, is that they sacrifice global benefit for local benefit. And that happens in all areas of life. You eat the piece of cake because you have an acute local benefit versus the global benefit of a six-pack that lasts for a very long time, or better health, etc., right?
You mean the instant gratification as opposed to delayed gratification?
Yes, exactly. And I like saying global. I just like saying local versus global, because it happens in an organization. For example, sales guys don't want to put the notes in the thing because it's a pain in the butt to put the notes in the CRM. But finance needs the notes, customer service needs the notes, success needs the notes. Like all of these other departments need those notes for all the other things that we're going to do. And so it's a local cost, but for a global benefit. And so I think if people were able to delay that immediate gratification, which is like, this is the nature of success. I think
it's so funny, man.
The three things that I think were in common of the ultra successful were inflated sense of self, as in they thought that they deserved big things, they wanted to go after big things.
They believed in themselves, right?
Inferiority, never being good enough, and impulse control.
Those are the three factors of the most successful.
They're like, when they did a common factors analysis, like these people think, they believe that they can achieve all this amazing stuff, and then it's an amazing paradox, because at the same time they think they're not good enough, and they are insecure about whether they can achieve it. And they have impulse control.